Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan, along with Kathryn Peterson, and today we are going to dive into a topic that will typically have a seasonal application, but our hope is that regardless of the time you're tuning in, that you'll grab some things from this that'll either help you prepare for a quarterly review of your business, as well as to execute on that quarterly review if you happen to be reviewing it again at the time in which we've hit those magical quarterly dates. But before we dive into any of those details, I want to welcome in my fabulous co-host, Kathryn. Always great to see you.
Good to see you, Michael. This is a timely topic, and I'm glad that we're covering it today together.
Yeah, me too. And in fact, you say timely. I want to be clear at the time that we're recording this. I've just gone through a whole series of first quarter reviews with my clients, and as I've done that, I've noticed that you get the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I don't necessarily mean the results that come from them, although that's a different topic of some interest. I mean the good, bad, and the ugly around how people feel prepared to use their quarterly focus plans as a review tool and some of the ancillary tools that are available to them if they're going to have a really effective review process. So I'm excited to unpack this because I want people to feel like this isn't a mystery that they have to, figure out, or even worse, that it's just not worth figuring out, and they just can continue to do the same things they've always done and expect a different result. We know that definition. So my hope today is that you and I will help stop the insanity.
That's right. That's right. Well, good. Well, first, let's talk about the timeliness of it. When should a quarterly review happen besides once a quarter? Give us a little bit more specifics on when that should happen.
So I'm going to target this answer toward what I think is our entrepreneurial audience, because again, if you're working in a large, Fortune 500 company, that process is somewhat predefined by the terms of either your regulation or your financials. So there's going to be some sort of, in your bylaws, it's defined for you. You don't have to think about it. But for an entrepreneur, the logical place to start is if we just look at a general quarterly calendar. So we're talking end of first quarter is going to be March 30th, at the end of June, the end of the second quarter on June 30th, and again in September, and again in December. If we look at those, it typically takes a small business owner about a week to 10 days to get all of the data points they need in order to execute on a quarterly review. And by data points, I might mean sales information, operations information, financial information, things that would help inform the data that they need to review in order to make adjustments to their business plan and continue to execute with success. So I would tell most people, if you're sitting down with your annual calendar, and this, you can do this any time of year, wherever you are today listening, you can pull out an annual calendar, and those dates don't move. They are the literal end of financial quarters. So go ahead and pick a spot. Typically how long it takes to get the statements you need or the reports you need in order to do that. If it's in that 7 to 10 day window, why not in the first week of April, or in the first week of July, or in the first week of October? Go ahead and schedule that so that you have that time blocked. And now we're not looking for a space for the quarterly review. It's predefined. And by the way, your Outlook or any other calendar system you're using will allow you to make that a repeated quarterly or annual event so that you don't ever have to think about it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's continue to talk about planning while we're on that. How long should someone plan for this to take?
Complexity of your business might determine the real answer to that, but I always look at this through the lens of, if you give yourself a good half day. So if a half day in your world is 3 to 4 hours, depending on how you schedule your day, you'll have plenty of time to do it, and most people get this done in less than 90 minutes. So the purpose of blocking more time out than you need is, what if some of what you dig into starts to create questions you didn't know existed, for answers that you need to find out? Well, it'd be really good if you already had the time in which you could go to your accountant, or go to your attorney, or go to your director of operations, or go to your marketing manager, wherever this question is rooted, and maybe get a real-time answer, and not have to leave the review sitting and coming back to it, hours, if not days later. So I'm a big fan of block out a half a day and plan on spending probably upwards of 90 minutes.
Great. Great. That's helpful for people to plan as they move forward. And then let's talk about the benefits of doing this quarterly review. So what do you see people before and after get through this? So why is someone doing it?
Yeah, so I think it comes from the cadence that we create when we create a quarterly focus plan. So the concept is if we're going to take your business plan and chunk it down into a quarter, and we've talked about this on a previous episode, but the highlight of this would simply be we've chosen at Building Champions to use a quarterly window of time because it seems to be the right distance between a goal that you've set and a time frame in which that foreseeable future is one that you have a high degree of control or influence over. So there's a high likelihood that you can execute without a lot of reasons or excuses along the way. If you set that gate too far out, like I'm going to do a 6 month plan or an annual plan, the risk you have is events you have no control over could really disrupt the direction that you were going to go with that plan. And now you spend the year frustrated, feeling like, well, I've kind of, what was the point of that whole exercise of creating this annual plan? I can't do that anyway. And that defeatism often results in, well, then forget the plan. Versus if you're doing a quarterly plan, if something major happens, you've given yourself plenty of time to shift gears. You've given yourself plenty of time to make those adjustments and not frustrate the overall performance of your year. So because we've created a quarterly focus plan, a quarterly review simply becomes the right cadence in which to do that. And we could talk a little bit about the bridge between those two, but I think that's really where we've landed on the quarterly review. I said earlier, Fortune 500 companies already have this scheduled. There's a lot of wisdom that has gone into decades and decades of research as to why quarterly reviews seem to be the right amount of time. And I'm not here to argue against history.
Yeah, that's right. We don't want to do that. So then as someone goes through their quarterly review, is there a list of questions or things that they should think through besides just looking at the plan? So what are some topics that someone should really go through as they do this?
So I'll describe it as a process, and that will inform the topics as you said. And I think the first thing I would ask someone to do is to gather all of the data points that you would need to inform the things you created in that focus plan in the first place. So let's be specific about that. If you created a plan, a quarterly plan with certain outcomes related to production, whether you're in manufacturing or you're in sales, you have a degree of, hey, this is what we need to produce in that period of time. Well, then you might want to get some data that shows you where that sales information has resulted in either proposals that went out or contracts that were accepted or contracts that were closed, that type of data. So again, I'm trying to be general enough for our audience because people have different measuring tools. You and I know what that might look like in the housing industry, but other folks will look at that differently. But the point is, if you're measuring production, well, we need some production data. If you're measuring finances, you're measuring things like how did we do on a P&L? And if you're managing to a P&L and a balance sheet, well, then you're going to need some good financial reports. So regardless of the software that you're using, most modern software is able to pretty quickly produce those reports. So the assumption is that you've done a really good job accounting. You've done a really good job tracking. And if those have been your habit throughout the daily and weekly routines, then the quarterly reports that you need, those are going to be easy. So first step, gather all those reports. Second step in the process is take that quarterly focus plan that you created and scorecard it. And scorecarding is really simple, Kathryn. I mean, if I lay out my quarterly focus plan and you are going to help me walk through that, you're going to start asking me questions around what was the theme for the quarter? Did you stay on point for the theme? What were the outcomes that you were aiming for? Sometimes personal, sometimes professional. And then what were the disciplines and projects that you committed to? And and really, we're going to just walk through those line by line. How did we do? Some folks like to get very technical in their scoring. They'll come up with a numbering system. Maybe it's 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10. The system of grading that you choose isn't nearly as important as that you do some process of scorecarding. So whatever works for you, it's a chance for you to get honest with yourself first. So first, you've gathered all the data points that you need. Second, you've scorecarded. Third step in the process is I'm going to ask you to run what you and I have called the KISS filter. We're going to look now through what you just scorecarded and ask yourself, as I shift into the quarter ahead, what would be the things I would need to keep doing because the scorecard says they're clearly working. They're working toward my quarterly commitments, but they're also in alignment with my annual objectives. And that's probably a good point we should make here, Kathryn, is we talked about the annual planning process. Any of you can go back and review that episode if you're interested. Quarterly focus planning is a byproduct of the annual plan. It's not in place of. We're still going to use an annual plan to set our course. We're simply going to make our adjustments on a quarterly basis. So back to the process. If you've gone through that KISS filter, you're going to keep certain things. You're going to improve upon other things. There are going to be some things that you look at and say, okay, I did make effort there and there was progress, but I found a better way. There's a way to be more efficient or effective or profitable. So I'm going to improve upon that. The S, or the KISS, the first S is going to be for start. What are some new things I need to add to this quarterly plan because the season has shifted? Again, I'll reference what we do in the housing industry. We all know that the first quarter is often, in most markets, winter season, which means a slower level of buy-sell activity because you're really relying on a more limited pool of people who want to list their home or buy a home. So you're going to shift in the second quarter to a new spring home buying season. Historically speaking, that means you need to start doing some things to be prepared for that. Some of those are internal, some of those are external. The final S is stop. And this one's a hard one for people. Most entrepreneurs don't want to stop anything. They just want to, they think that fourth S is stack. What else can I stack on and keep stacking until the plate is so full that they're just, buried under the weight of it? My encouragement would be to use that fourth filter, the stop filter, to find out what isn't working. Maybe it's not working because the market conditions aren't right. Like you might have introduced a new product, but the market's not ready for it. Maybe what's not working is the way in which you're executing, what you're making or what you're selling isn't refined enough to attract the audience that it needs to align with it. And so you just need to stop that marketing plan or that branding model that you chose. But here's where I'll land on that is if you will use stop as part of your filters, remember you have the option of taking out back and shooting it dead. I mean, some people just need to kill something. Like stop it, don't ever do it again, don't ever bring up the word again. But a lot of things in this category, Kathryn, are just things we need to give a rest. We need to put it up on a shelf. We know where to get it if we need it, or file it in your, filing system on your computer. Stop could just simply mean not now. So that's the process I would advise you to set up, and that's an example of some of the steps in that process.
That's great. That's super helpful. So, I especially love the KISS filter as far as just looking at lots of things that we do in our plan and lots of things that we do in our life. I think it's a good exercise to go through more frequently than just quarterly.
Funny you say that. So, Lori and I spend time between two different homes. And so often when we're leaving our season in Arizona and we're moving back to our season in Oregon, we run that same filter. Okay, before we leave, while it's fresh in our minds, what will we come back to next year that we would keep doing, improve upon, stop doing, or start doing? And it's a really helpful filter. You're absolutely right. And it does have plenty of applications. Of course, we have some friends now that know that we do this, and they're like, "Hey, don't put us on the stop filter. Like, we still want to see you next year," which is always great. It's nice to know that people want to still spend time with you. But
Yeah,
my takeaway is exactly what you said. It has a broad application, and yeah, I'm just trying to apply it here to the quarterly process.
great. Okay, so now someone has been through that quarterly review process. Now what?
Yeah, so if you've done this, I think the next natural step is to draft a new quarterly focus plan. You'll probably find if you run the KISS filter on the scorecard you just did for the previous quarter, that many of those things will carry over. And that's often a question I get when creating a plan is, well, a lot of this is, like, I don't feel like I'm making some, massive change or wild adjustment. And my answer is, well, great. If the scorecard says most things are going well, then they're either going to be in the keep or improve categories. So a lot of that will carry over, but it may need some recasting, I guess, to use a fishing term, that you need to think about it through the lens of, okay, I'll keep doing it, but I'm, now in this spring season or second quarter or third quarter, whatever time frame that you're heading into, and I might need to make some adjustments in order to keep doing it. And so it may look pretty similar, but of those things you decided to start or stop, that's where you will definitely make some changes in your focus plan. And there's two pieces of counsel I give on those as you look at those. First of all, don't try to remodel the plane while you're in the air with passengers and valuable cargo. That's always dangerous. Choose your adjustments wisely, because you're operating. The analogy would be you're operating a real business that requires cash flow for you to survive and requires customers to be happy in order to keep either coming back as customers or referring others to you. So, make sure you're making the start and stop changes, artfully. And that may require some real strategy. This is where a coach comes in my world, but, you may have others in your life, counsel, advisors, board members, folks that really can help you think through, how do I do what I need to do? Because these changes have to happen. If we're being really specific with that, Kathryn, sometimes it involves, we need to make a change in our lineup. We've got the wrong person in the seat on the bus, and that's where it's not just improve. We need to stop. And so I remind people in the seats on the bus analogy, be careful. You don't need to throw someone off the bus while you're driving 60. You can pull into the bus stop. You can create a bus transfer. You can help them get where they're going. And sometimes that's a great place to pick up the next passenger that joins your team. So artful and careful process around the start and the stop. And once you've done that, you've drafted now this new quarterly focus plan for the quarter ahead. I said there were two things. Now I think you need to share that plan with the people that have a vested interest in it. So if you've got a team, if you've got an assistant, if you have a partner, whatever your structure is, these people need to understand, hey, these are some things I've decided to change in my plan. And I'm doing this a little differently, or we are doing this a little differently because of the research I did reviewing some of those data points. And these are the adjustments we're going to make. Make sure as you do that, you remind them how it stays in alignment with your long-term vision, because that's the whole point of these adjustments. Is it's like an alignment in your car. If our wheels are a little off, by getting them realigned, we're operating with a lot more efficiency. Well, you want to explain that to them in your business, that we're not just making changes for the sake of making changes. We're doing them in order to create efficiency. And so that's my takeaway with the what's next. You've got to draft it, be very artful with the changes that you make, and make sure you share it with others. And why not land on a third? Because I guess this, it seems so obvious, but sometimes gets missed. Make sure if you've made those changes that they're reflected in your calendar as well. Because it's one thing to say, oh, I intend to um, do these things a little bit differently, or even continue to do these things that matter. But if they're not calendared, they tend to get treated like I've got to fit them in somewhere instead of prioritize them. And the whole purpose of that focus plan was to create the focus on your priority. So make sure that your priority ends up in your calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing to add that I like to go through as I move from one quarter to the next is, what are the daily disciplines that I've turned into habits that I'm still going to do? I'm still going to keep. So it's still in that keep category, but it's a habit. And I'd rather use that spot in my quarterly plan for new habits that I'm trying to create, those new daily disciplines to push myself, because it's so easy to fill up that category with stuff from our prior quarterly plan that was easy. And so I try not to put habits there that are ingrained.
So good, Kathryn. We've talked about that, but you're so right to share that with our audience, because if you've done this for enough quarters in a row, it can be a little bit methodical to where you do start to develop those habits, and now you're just gonna camp on them. And I think what you just suggested is what most entrepreneurial people would understand is, if I don't keep pushing myself to grow, what I may find out when I'm doing my quarterly reviews going forward is I'm actually not growing at all, which by definition means maybe I'm losing ground. I'm no longer
Mhm.
taking the the risks that I need to take to grow my business or grow in an area of my leadership. So great call on that one. The phrase I've heard Daniel Harkavy use, and you've heard me repeat it, is he'll say something in that quarterly plan needs to make your palms sweat a little bit. If you're not feeling a little bit nervous about it, and let's look at the brain science on that. When I say nervous, I don't mean you should be like shuddering in fear. I mean, anxiety is really hard for your brain to differentiate from excitement. When you look at the brain science, your brain is having trouble knowing the difference between I'm afraid of this or I'm excited of this. So anxiety is that ambiguous place in between where I don't know what to do, which is why we
Mhm.
describe ourselves as kind of paralyzed, because it's that. So it's reminding ourselves why I'm excited about this change, why I'm excited to mix it up and let, as you said, a habit now, remove that from the plan because it is a habit, so that I can push myself to try something new. Such a great call on your part. Thank you for calling that out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, before we wrap up, is there any other advice that you have for someone working on their quarterly plan review?
Well, let's look at this through a wide lens because I've been doing this for such a long time. It's very tempting for me to focus on what I see today, but the truth is I've been doing this over a long period of time. So let's lay this out for our audience because we don't know. Some of these folks may be they may be doing this process better than I do it for longer than I do it. So I want to be honest about that, and I also want to say there could be somebody listening who's thinking, okay, I've really never done that. I don't really know if I'm emotionally ready to do that. So here's what I'd say in the wide lens is wherever you are today and wherever you are on that spectrum, anything you can take from what we've shared today and apply it by definition goes back to our episode on atomic habits last year. Those small 1% improvements that are repeated over time produce a massive multiple in terms of results. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to just, make a quantum leap. Maybe small steps are what you need. So I hope wherever you are on that spectrum, if you're at the beginning, don't try to jump into, some sort of deep financial review and get yourself overwhelmed and suddenly you're paralyzed to be able to execute. And if you're a veteran of this, don't think, oh, well, I already do all that. This episode didn't really unpack anything revolutionary, so I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I would say in either case, pick something small that you can change and see what that does to create a multiplication effect for you. And then if you really are grooving on this, don't forget, maybe there's somebody on your team who's not grooving on it. Maybe there's somebody that you care about in your business network that's not grooving on it. You don't need to be a professional coach. You just need to be a friend or a partner who can come alongside that person and say, "Hey, I'd like to show you what's been working for me, and I'm hopeful that it could help you." That's always a great application for improving yourself is when you have to share it with someone else, when you have to teach. Sure enough, I mean, Kathryn, you teach, how many classes a year? Dozens and dozens of classes. It elevates your game when you have to stand up in front of a room or in front of a Zoom video screen and you've got all these faces. Suddenly you get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great tips for people, especially the asking other people about their quarterly plan. I think that keeps me focused on mine and focused on what I need to do because it's always funny if you ask somebody else and you don't have yours done, right? So it keeps everybody in line, and so pass it on. That's
Yeah.
the outcome of that. So great thought,
Yeah.
Michael.
Good tip. I've done this occasionally. I think I've done this with you as, sometimes I'll just pop my quarterly plan up on the screen while we're
Mhm.
meeting. And it's not for any other reason. I mean, I walk on feet of clay. I think you wisely called out one of the ones in which I had truncated my discipline to a point where I knew what I meant, but you had to call out and say, "But Michael, that doesn't you don't have enough specificity in that in order to get that in your calendar." And I think that's what we all need. We all need an accountability partner who's looking at it through an outside lens. You can justify anything you want, you can defend anything you want, but having that person who's willing to look at it with you, you're never above that. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of areas of our world today. And I'll make no political comments about that, just that I think we're seeing that without some visibility to a review process, a lot of things can become at best confusing, at worst really catastrophic. And all I care about with our audience, who are these entrepreneurial people who are out there fighting and hacking every day to make a living, is I want you to feel empowered to know not just where things are in your plan, but what you can do to make adjustments in order to improve upon them. And I hope today's process was helpful to you.
Yeah, it was great. It's perfect to hear. I can never hear it enough. And it's always good to go through. I think this was a beneficial one for our audience. And so with that, I'll close us out on this episode of Building Bigger Lives. Thanks, Michael, for sharing all your knowledge today. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, all the places. Please like, please share, and please listen. And thank you so much for following us. We appreciate it.